Well, good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Ann Gillies and Restoring the Mosaic. Today, I have a guest with me, and we're going to talk a little bit more, of course, on gender ideology, which is my lane for sure. But Shannon is a dad, and we met in Ottawa when I was there at the Strong and Free conference. So he is a dad, and his daughter has transitioned. She is in the process of transitioning. So today you're going to hear his story, but also just his reflections on what has happened, and as a parent, what it's been like for him. So welcome, Shannon. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. And I guess I'll just get started. Maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit, other than just the dad. You're also
Sure.
you're an advocate, and that's kind of how we really came together and got talking.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a reluctant culture warrior. This issue of trans identification and kids and our education system, and the nature of how we're framing our understanding of men and women in the last decade or so is part of the culture wars. And I was drawn into this. I've been following the issues for a number of years, but was drawn into this when my daughter, natal female daughter, came to me a few years ago and said that my house was unsafe for her to live in, and she was going to live permanently with her mother. After the fact, and in the last year or so, I've come to realize that was the school making a determination, and sort of the culture of trans to cut parents who might be questioning the trans identification out of the child's life to from their point of view, to protect the child.
Can you just explain, just for a second, what made your home unsafe? That we hear that all the time,
Yeah.
safe places, and certainly within the school system. What in her mind, or did she even explain, what made your home unsafe?
There wasn't any explanation, and I really didn't understand the language that she was using. I'd heard this idea of safe space before, coming from universities and sort of conflicts on universities where people were demonstrating and protesting, sometimes quite aggressively and loudly, about safe places. And safe places seems to me to mean freedom to be protected from ideas that one doesn't agree with.
That nails it, Shannon. That's exactly. When you're talking about the demonstrations, university demonstrations that are aggressive, very aggressive in this area, to actually suppress ideas that would conflict with a certain ideology that isn't established or proven or any of those things. It's just become this big, it's like I'm thinking in my mind about, the nuclear mushroom ball, that kind of went, whoo. That's kind of what's happened. It's like this ideological, I don't even know what word to use. It's just this ideological mushroom explosion.
It's an assertion. These are assertions on reality, and some of the underpinnings philosophically of this ideology are that of social constructionism, that we make up reality using words. And there's a whole set of different philosophical approaches to how we map reality and how we engage with reality. But these assertions have just laid and paved over more rational approaches to how we construct our sense of meaning and our maps of reality. And so the assertion is that we socially construct things like marriage, things like gender, so we make them up. And when that assertion is made, it lays the groundwork for those same people to create their own, assert their own reality into being, and they just project it from a place of this is our belief, and they project that belief onto reality, and they make the claim that this is the way the world is, and they shut down all question and all dissent.
Well, and what you're saying is so right on. And the reality is that because they have so manipulated our language, for instance, totally confusing, purposely confusing sex and gender, which is my nemesis. I mean, I hear it all the time when people now, just ordinary people, talk about gender all the time when actually they're meaning biological sex. And so, I mean, that's just one area, but the language has been so distorted and so manipulated that people don't even know what they're talking about anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's deliberate. I mean,
yes.
From a place of origin, it's deliberate. And I think it's mostly become unconscious in the way that this assertion has been made in our society in the West. And we've never had assertions like this in human history. I say that because I spent almost 30 years studying comparative religions and mythology and cultures from around the world in my own sort of quest to understand meaning. And there's no culture, there's no myth, there's no religious narrative. You know, we go to the deepest expressions of who we are as human beings and our attempts to articulate our relationship with God. And I think all people at all times have tried to do. There are no significant stories whatsoever that a boy can become a girl or a girl can become a boy. It's a complete fabrication.
When we were in Ottawa, we had a discussion that I kind of went, oh yeah, this is really, really true and really interesting, because you also have a background with the Indigenous community. And so we had this bit of a discussion of comparisons of government interference and control. And it's pretty obvious, pretty blatant in some ways to see a comparative situation when we look at the educational system and we think of implementing such draconian measures within our education system to control, manipulate, distort, confuse child's minds, saying that this is in their best interest. And so with the Indigenous community, I mean, we've just finally put to rest the schools that they were deported to, in the late 90s. That's kind of the last of the schools. And here we are, we're not deporting children into a school, but they get into the public school system and they're immediately funneled into this ideology that is imposed on them, largely without their parents' awareness. Parents have been largely unaware of the deep realities of it. So anyways, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I thought that was an interesting conversation and it kind of opened my eyes.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I did an undergraduate degree in creative writing at the University of British Columbia in the 90s, and they didn't give us any reading assignments. Our job was writing, so we had to go out and kind of find things that we felt were compelling and important to write about. And I happened to find myself, and I say this a lot, I'm a bit like Forrest Gump. I find myself in situations that open up opportunity. And in this case, I was in the easiest to describe as a healing circle. And there was about 65 people in that healing circle, and about a third to maybe 40% were Indigenous survivors of residential schools. And we were dealing with life skills and our own trauma and limiting beliefs and the scripts we tell ourselves and these sorts of things. And so in that environment, I heard firsthand stories from probably 20 to 25 Indigenous survivors of residential schools, and the horrors that some of these people survived are just unbelievable. And the residential schools are a complex part of our history. Originally, the idea was to speedily to civilize the Indians as speedily as they are fit to be civilized. And that was John A. Macdonald. I'm paraphrasing and I'm butchered the quote a little bit, but the idea was to bring the Indigenous people into the Western model of culture. People call that colonization. There was some positives that came out of that, and that's a very challenging thing to say.
Yes.
But what emerged out of it is modernity. It's the modern world, and over the same time period as residential schools occurred, our entire civilization transformed, and we're still transforming at the most rapid pace in human history. But we kind of figured out that it was a bad idea for a culture to take away another culture from children by imposing our morals and our values and our way of viewing the world, and doing so in many cases in forceful ways.
Yes, it's the force and the taking away their culture, their language, their individuality,
their model of the world, their relationship in their own religion to the Creator as they understand it, and we're doing similar things where schools seem to be appropriating authority from parents and saying that the schools know better than parents, and we're going to indoctrinate children in ways that we believe are correct, and where parents don't line up here, we're going to cut parents out of children's lives. And it's happening all over. There are court cases emerging all over the US now. We're starting to see some of that pushback in Canada. There was an Ontario Human Rights Tribunal case about this. Not specifically parents being cut off, but children being indoctrinated. I've been doing a lot of work. I spent 5 to 6 weeks traveling across Canada, talking with educators and school trustees and college professors and people who are affected by this. And it's happening in our Canadian schools. In Ottawa schools, teachers are leaking documents to me saying that they're using complex spreadsheets to lie to parents. They're socially transitioning children at school, which means that if a boy thinks they're a girl, they're allowing the boy to dress as a girl. They're changing his name and changing his pronouns and affirming a child, which from a psychological perspective is an extremely powerful social intervention.
So let me say something here that's, I think, you are just getting to such a root of the issue in the sense of this division of parent and child and the removal of relationship. This is, to me, such a core aspect of this whole ideology, is to deconstruct family, to deconstruct the wholesomeness of the family unit. And I'm not saying that every family unit is wholesome. That's not the issue. We want to look at generally the place where the family has so contributed and continues to contribute to society. It is the core of our whole existence. We are all impacted by family. And when we see what's happening with these teachers that are funneling children into this ideology and encouraging them, many of them, in fact, most, have some kind of underlying mental illness, mostly some kind of traumatic experience in childhood. Many are from divorced homes, many are autistic, all of those kind of things. And so teachers are taking it upon themselves under the guise of the education system, because it's being expected of them and has been trained into them, to help these children self-diagnose and to make it. I mean, this is really sad because the teachers are actually preventing the children from getting the psychological care that they actually need. And several years ago, I presented to our local school board on the transgender, what I saw happening, and my concerns about the medicalization, and my concerns about future lawsuits coming against the schools and teachers personally, because this is just like a a crisis waiting to happen, and that we are creating the greatest mental health crisis we have ever seen in our children. So this is like 4 or 5 years ago I presented. When I tried to present the following year to our school board, I was not allowed to. I have a court case against them. They wouldn't allow me as a professional and as a mom and a grandmother to even present to adult trustees on the school board. So talk about suppressing ideas and thoughts, and they're not even all my thoughts, of course, they're based in strong research, as opposed to the ideological perspective that has there's no longitudinal studies of how the effects are going to work out. In fact, there's several studies coming out now that are showing really the severity of what is happening to these children when they're put on puberty blockers and then hormones, and the long-term effects of infertility and bone mass and all that, not to mention the radical surgeries to reconstruct, so that these children can look like the sex they want to be. And of course, the subsequent surgeries upon surgeries. It's just it's a windfall for pharmaceutical and gender clinics. I mean, they're just bringing in the cash and on the backs of our children and the demise of their families. So, anyways, there I go, talking too much about that. But it's happened to you. You're seeing it.
Yeah, I'm seeing it, and I'm connected with parents. If you're a parent and you're watching this, there are parents groups that they formed on the internet, and they're rapidly growing, highly credible support systems, and parent support groups for this, people to talk to about what we're going through, and there are thousands and thousands of parents just like me. I'm in a fortunate position where, a lot of those parents aren't able to speak out. They can't speak publicly for a couple of reasons. One, their child. So they make a choice to maintain a relationship with a child. I knew that. So what happened to me when my child estranged herself from me a year ago was she told me she was taking hormone replacement therapy. And I asked about the negative side effects of testosterone as a long-term, the kids are taking, this is high doses. These testosterone injections are many multiples higher than what I produce as a man. In order to hijack a person's limbic system, they have to take high dose testosterone. And there are serious long-term side effects that we know about. And radically huge increase in risks of diabetes, different types of breast and reproductive cancers, heart attacks of 40 to 50% risk greater than men for the same age group and category of women. And then they're modifying their bodies, things that will lead to uterine atrophy and the atrophy of reproductive organs, leading to things like partial hysterectomies and full hysterectomies, and even worse. And so when I asked questions in a simple tone, no different than the tone I'm sharing with you, that resulted in a shutdown, and then a day later, a bombardment of angry and threatening texts, and I never want to talk to you again. So parents know, I knew that was going to be a likely outcome, unfortunately. My daughter's living with her mom. And I had been trying to rebuild the relationship from what I was then understanding as having been compromised by teachers at school and the school itself. And it was tenuous. And I realized that I can't be canceled. So my workplace is going to support me in speaking out about this. I'm not going to be investigated. So I live in Ottawa, and 40% of the people here work for the federal public service. The woke ideologues complaints about transphobia and bigotry can get into the workplace, and people can be investigated. We're seeing it in patterns all over. Guilt by associations. A husband was protesting with a well-known protester in Toronto. He's a first responder. His wife, who's a police officer, was investigated for transphobia and bigotry at her work because she's married to him. We live in a very censorious and challenging time. That has some parallels. Well, we're developing towards an authoritarian state where children are reporting parents to teachers, and people are being investigated for thought crimes. And I'm in a position where I'm somewhat shielded from that. So I felt that there were a bunch of things that were kind of, I'll borrow the word, intersecting.
Yes.
That were intersecting to allow me to speak openly, and also knowing that would compromise my relationship with my daughter long term. And hopefully she'll come back to me one day when we can get through this. But there aren't very many people who can speak, and I've decided to speak out.
I just really, really honor you in that, because it's not an easy road. And I mean, thank God for the workplace you have, that they are kind of supportive in this sense of allowing you, and knowing that you're not a bigot or hate monger or transphobic. Like, it's the name calling that has just taken, it's been so radicalized in the sense that we can't have an opinion or a different opinion, or we're canceled, right? And so the name calling goes a long way. And most people, up until the last year, I would say, I see a change coming. But certainly for the last 5, 6, 7 years, name calling has shut most people down from speaking.
And no one wants to be called a bigot or a transphobe or a racist. It's among the most threatening kinds of labels that we can have. We have a deep instinct as human beings to be part of a community.
That's right. And to be loving and kind. Actually, most of, and Canadians, we have this reputation of being kind and loving. And so when someone calls us a bigot, like, I mean, the first time that happened to me, I'm like, my mind went, oh my goodness, am I a bigot? I kind of was very self-critical, because I'm thinking, I hope that's not what I'm presenting. And then I went, oh, give your head a shake. That's not who you are at all. And you are not in any way transphobic or homophobic. You have an opinion that differs from someone else, and it's based on some pretty strong realities, which we don't want to deal with in our culture anymore. Realities mean nothing. It's all about what you think, how you feel. And that's the whole post culture. We've kind of post into the postmodern place where we totally respond to everything by how we feel and how we perceive things to be, rather than any sense of reality, of fact. So it doesn't matter how much fiction's in what you believe. That's what you believe, so that's what's true. And it's getting us in more and more trouble. Where do you see this ending? Like, do you see something changing? What thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I feel like there are things changing.
Yes.
I've followed this closely for a year. I've actually moved my actual professional practice down to an 8 or 10 hour a week engagement, and spent mostly a full-time year learning about this, connecting with people about it, following what's happening internationally and in Canada. We're starting to see big moves in the United Kingdom, where we had the Kira Bell case. The decision came in, I think it was December of 20, where the judge said that there's a clear, almost perfect pathway from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones, and that kids aren't old enough to consent. And then
Kira Bell, just for those who are listening, was she had transitioned and then detransitioned, and then at that point recognized, whoa, this has been a very structured and strategic process that I have been involved in, and that I was funneled into, so to speak.
Yeah, her claim was, how could I have consented to this when I didn't know, I wasn't old enough to understand the physiological impacts and the psychological impacts of this, and I was too young. And now there was an interim report that came out from the UK, I want to say in February or March, called the Interim CASS report, CASS. That was an investigation that was launched independently about the medical transition of children. the report came out and said that the NHS, called the GIDS, is the Gender Identity Disorder Services Clinic at Tavistock, and that's their main gender clinic in the UK, was unsafe for children. Just flatly, it is unsafe for children in this environment.
And this is the reality. This is truly unsafe, not this.
Unsafe, not the postmodern claim of unsafe
That's right.
Of safe spaces, that it was a threat to children's health. And then just recently, the Minister of Health for the UK said that there was an urgent need for a full investigation, and that the brakes are being slammed on in gender transitioning children in the UK, and they're not the only country. So places like Sweden and Norway, France has put out a declaration.
I think there's 10 countries now. I just read just briefly over the weekend, 10 countries that have put the brakes on transitioning hormonally. So the medicalization is just like, whoop, stopping this. Until, adulthood. Like they can't do it for adults, but we can protect our children. This is a new thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So there's a positive frame and some positive steps that are happening, and things happening quite quickly. So it's always kind of a relief when one of these news pieces breaks. We're starting to see them almost weekly.
Yes.
Florida put forward a statement, and they banned this type of care for kids, and they're really pumping the brakes there. Texas a couple of days ago, and Abbott in Texas is rubs a lot of people the wrong way sometimes with very definitive policies, but they have said that parents can be investigated for child abuse for medically transitioning their children.
So this is an issue, because to me, you're traumatizing your child.
Yeah.
And you are, I've been saying this drumming this drum for a long time, that what we're doing in the schools, what we are teaching, what we are encouraging the children to do, and this whole idea of even socially transitioning, because it leads into other things, is actually child abuse.
I agree with you.
Number one, we're lying to these children. We are so lying to these children that they can be something they can never be. Biologically, they can look like something they want to be. They can never change their actual sexual identity. And so we begin with a lie. And when you take that path down the beaten road and go over this way a little bit, then the lie becomes just like astronomical. And that's where we're at. The pendulum, though, is starting. It's gone too far, hasn't it? We're seeing it.
It has gone too far. And when I was writing about the survivors of residential schools and our policies of that led to those abuses, those institutional abuses in the 90s, no one would listen to me. There was no one I could have a conversation with about this. There was a big standoff that I wrote about, and it was, the reality was so divorced from what the media and the national narrative was about this standoff between Indigenous traditionals and RCMP that it didn't even, not even comparable.
Well, we see that. We see that daily.
We're seeing that now. We saw that with the truckers' protests in Ottawa, and how the distortions about agendas and politics and accusations of bigotry. The one guy, I want to say, oh gosh, I can't remember his name. Accused of being a racist and a bigot, and I went to his Facebook page and looked over years of his posts, and he's a pipe carrier. He was honored by Indigenous traditionals for his contribution to Indigenous the conversation, and for relationships with traditional Indigenous people, and celebrated with song and drumming. And when he talks about the cosmology and shares prayers with Indigenous traditionals, he's speaking a language that I was taught in terms of the cosmological structure and the respect for each other. And yet he's been labeled a racist and a white supremacist. And the narratives are just completely divorced from reality. And that's where we are now.
You were seeing that in the 1990s. So you
I was
kind
seeing that
of
in the 90s. Yeah.
frontline
Yeah.
view early on of what distortions could happen.
Mhm.
And so I think that kind of you've been prepared very well in many ways mentally to understand the times where many people just they don't understand it.
Yeah, it's funny you put it in those terms. I grew up in a household with a narcissist. I'm an abuse survivor. And one of the tools of the narcissist is to distort reality. They create a false reality and force people to participate in it. And I was forced to participate in a false reality. And I really think that I was put here to survive that and to be able to see it and spot it and articulate what's happening. That we're embedded in the moment in a false reality that's being propped up by our media and by our government and by our school system. And that false reality is deeply abusive and traumatizing to children. And we're going to look back on this hopefully sooner than later, but it may be decades before we have truth and reconciliation on the gender medicalization of children. But there really is, there's a straight line. Grade 1 kids are being taught there's no such thing as biological sex in public schools in Canada. It's part of the SOGI curriculum in British Columbia. That's in every school district. That's creeping into Alberta. Parents are very concerned there. Ontario has been teaching this in various forms for 5 or 7 years, if not longer. Kids are being deeply confused by this. And then we have legislative mechanisms that say, you can only affirm. The anti-conversion therapy bill that passed in December of last year unanimously.
Yes, I worked on that for a long time. I was part of a group, and I'm telling you, it's like banging your head against the wall.
Yeah.
But you have to keep pushing because you
Yeah.
have to. I think we have to be able to expose what's there. I mean, I feel like that's our job. We don't get to control what people do with it when they find out the truth. But I think you and I both are on the same page that people are going to be very, very, very angry in the future. Parents are already, I mean, they're so sad and grieved and for yourself. Thank God for you that you have been able to come to this place and time with the support of people around you to actually address some of these issues, Shannon. And I think it's a tremendous, tremendous thing you're doing. I really want to applaud you on it because it's so, so important for such a time as this, really. We're ringing the alarm. Mm-hmm. And that's what we can do. And whatever else we can do to get people to wake up to the true reality of the abuse of our children. And you put it in the right words, the totally right word. This is so abusive.
I'm launching my campaign for school board trustee here in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board for public trustee. I happen to live in the zone where Canada's only trans-identified school trustee is the incumbent. He, biological male, is currently running for NDP member of provincial parliament in a Liberal stronghold. So I suspect that he goes by the name Lyra Evans. I expect that Lyra will be running again as trustee in this ward, which puts me in an interesting position to create an awful lot of, I suspect I will get an awful lot of abuse, but I have a tremendous number of allies and parents and activists, both locally and across the country, who will support the run and support putting out the narrative, the truth.
Yes.
About what's happening to our kids and the kind of censorship and abuse that's happening to anyone who disagrees with this narrative that's leading ultimately to, well, just recently the incoming head of the World Professional Association of Transgender Health said that children who are put on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones will never experience the pleasures of intimacy with another human being. They will not develop sexually and not be able to have an orgasm ever, and they will be sterilized. That's the impact of gender ideology on our kids, and laws that say you can't even question the process.
That's right. And Jess Jennings, doctor, Dr.
That's right.
Marcy Bowers just recently made the same statement that that these children will never be able to be sexually fulfilled, never have an orgasm, which of course the whole world is. That's what we judge as.
That's our connection with our intimate partner. It's the most sacred act that we can engage in.
But
in our lives.
And that's never going to happen. And I mean, Jazz Jennings has made some statements after multiple surgeries. Well, let me just wrap this up a little bit. I think it's what a huge step for you to run for. Is it school board?
School board. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Your school board trustee, because I think that's. I mean, any of those offices are just so important, and you are incredibly articulate. You are incredibly well informed. So I do wish you the best, and I hope that as we begin to connect dots with parents, and I'm going to ask Shannon if you would just email me some of those parent groups, and so that people watching, I can send things out to them and say, hey, if you want to connect, here's where you need to go to connect, because parents all over the place in Canada are just reeling with the backlash of all of this. So thank you again. Any last comments that you have? Maybe we can do this again in a few months.
I very much appreciate talking to you. I would share the name of I think the most important organization at the moment, and that's GenSpect.
Yes.
And they're an international organization, and there are resources for parents through GenSpect, as well as some statistics and information, because we get a lot of accusations and a lot of things like, well, aren't you, if you don't affirm your child, they're going to kill themselves. Well, what's the actual truth behind that claim? And so tremendous resources, GenSpect, for parents and people who are concerned. I very much appreciate talking with you, Dr. Gillies, and the opportunity to share some of my experience. I know that a lot of people just can't talk about this publicly because they're afraid of losing their children, or afraid of losing the relationship, afraid of losing their jobs being investigated. It sounds horrifying to say that, but we live in a society where that's the case now. If you have wrongthink, you will be ostracized and punished socially and by the state for thought crime.
That's right. That's where we're at. We are hoping that trajectory will change.
Indeed.
But it's going to take a while. So we'll keep moving forward, keep doing what you're doing, Shannon. You are making a difference. I just want to affirm you. I'm going to affirm you in that. You are making
Thank you so much.
difference. One thing I say to, I was teaching on last week to some mental health workers, and I said, affirm the child. Absolutely. Don't affirm this false identity.
Yeah.
Affirm truth. So I want to affirm you today and say thank you so much for what you're doing and for reaching out and for being there for others.
Thank you. It's my duty.
That's wonderful. It is our duty.